Marcus Reynolds had learned long ago to keep his head down in Mrs. Madeline Brooks' class. It wasn't worth the trouble to draw attention to himself. But today was different. Just as the students began packing up, Mrs. Brooks spoke, her voice cutting through the usual shuffle of backpacks and chatter. "Marcus," she said, clasping her hands together, her tone laced with something unreadable. "Stay behind for a moment." A few heads turned, whispers flickering through the air, but no one said anything aloud. Henry Crawford, sitting beside Marcus, gave him a look, half curiosity, half warning. Marcus shrugged, trying to appear indifferent, but a tightness settled in his chest. He took his time putting his notebook away before approaching her desk. Mrs. Brooks studied him for a moment, her lips curling ever so slightly, as if she had been waiting for this. "I overheard you talking the other day," she said. "About your grandfather." Marcus frowned. "What about him?" "You said he was a musician." Something in her tone made the air feel heavier. "Yeah," Marcus nodded slowly. "He was a pianist, played jazz." Mrs. Brooks leaned back in her chair, tapping her fingers against the desk, her smile widening, though it lacked any warmth. "You must have picked up a thing or two." Marcus hesitated. He knew where this was going, and he didn't like it. "A little," he admitted. "Good," she said, standing up. "Tomorrow you'll play for the class." Marcus froze. "What?" She gestured toward the old, upright piano sitting in the corner of the classroom, a relic no one had touched in years. "You'll play something. Show us what you've got." This wasn't a request. It was a setup. A few remaining students paused in the doorway, their eyes flicking between the two of them. Marcus felt their gazes like weight on his shoulders. He could hear the barely contained amusement in their silence, waiting for him to refuse, to stumble, to make a fool of himself, but he wouldn't give her that satisfaction. "All right, he said, his voice steady. Mrs. Brooks arched a brow as if she hadn't expected him to agree, but she didn't take it back. The bell rang and Marcus grabbed his bag, turning toward the door. "Tomorrow," she reminded him, "we'll all be watching." Marcus barely slept that night. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the conversation replaying over and over in his head. He knew exactly what Mrs. Brooks expected. She thought he would embarrass himself. She wanted to reinforce whatever opinion she had already formed about him. But she didn't know the full story. The next morning, word had spread. Whispers followed Marcus through the hallways. By the time he reached class, half the room was already buzzing with anticipation. "You gonna play today?" Eric Simmons smirked from across the room, arms crossed. Marcus didn't answer. "Didn't know you were a piano guy," Henry murmured beside him. Marcus simply focused on his notebook. "There's a lot of things people don't know." Mrs. Brooks entered, setting her books down with an air of satisfaction. She barely acknowledged the students settling in, her focus drifting toward Marcus before she began the lesson. The first half of class dragged, but Marcus barely heard a word. He was too focused on what was coming. Then the moment arrived. "Well," Mrs. Brooks said, glancing at the clock, "we have a little time before our next lesson. Perfect." She turned toward the upright piano, dust settling in the corners of the keys. "Marcus," she said smoothly, "let's see what you can do." The room shifted. Students straightened in their seats, some whispering, some smirking, some watching closely, waiting for the disaster they expected. Marcus took a slow breath and stood. The moment stretched as he walked toward the piano. Someone snickered behind him. He didn't need to hear the words to know what they were thinking. Mrs. Brooks clasped her hands together. "Play whatever you'd like." Marcus studied the piano. The keys were worn, yellowed with age, a few chipped at the edges. He ran his fingers lightly over them once. It was slightly out of tune. He inhaled, sat down, rested his hands on the keys. Then a snicker from behind, low but clear. That was all it took. Marcus wasn't just proving Mrs. Brooks wrong anymore. He was proving everyone wrong. The classroom had never been this quiet. Even Mrs. Brooks, who usually carried herself with smug certainty, had an almost curious look in her eyes. Marcus placed his fingers on the keys, a deep breath, a moment of stillness. Then he played. The first notes drifted through the air, soft and steady, a blues progression, one his grandfather had played for years. His fingers moved effortlessly, rolling through the chords, his left hand keeping time while his right danced over the melody. The whispers stopped. The snickers vanished. Even the kids who had smirked before sat frozen. Mrs. Brooks's arms slowly folded over her chest, her brows furrowing just slightly. She had expected hesitation, a shaky start. Instead, she was hearing something she hadn't prepared for. Marcus didn't stop to see their reactions. He wasn't playing for them anymore. He was playing for himself, for his grandfather. The music swelled, deep rolling bass lines pulsing beneath a soaring melody, notes colliding and resolving in perfect harmony. It wasn't just skill, it was a story. And then the crescendo. His fingers pressed firmly against the keys, striking chords that echoed against the walls. The music filled every inch of the room, pushing against the silence, against every expectation they had placed on him. Then, silence. The last note hung in the air before fading. For a moment, no one moved. Then a single clap. Then another. And then, applause. Tyler let out a low whistle. Eric, who had cracked jokes earlier, shook his head. I didn't know he could do that. Marcus exhaled. His heart wasn't pounding from nerves. It was pounding from something else. Victory. But the loudest silence of all? Mrs. Brooks. She stood by her desk, arms still crossed, lips pressed tightly together. The applause continued around her, but she hadn't moved, hadn't said a word. And Marcus? He didn't need her words. He had already said everything he needed to say. Marcus Reynolds took his time. He knew if he moved too quickly, it would look like he was nervous. If he hesitated too much, it would seem like he was afraid. Instead, he slid his notebook into his backpack, adjusted the straps, and walked toward Mrs. Madeline Brooks' desk like he had nothing to worry about. The remaining students lingered at the door, their curiosity outweighing their usual rush to get to lunch. The air in the room had shifted, something heavier than before. Mrs. Brooks clasped her hands together, studying him with an expression Marcus had learned to recognize over time. I overheard you talking the other day, she said. Marcus frowned. About what? Your grandfather. At that, Marcus stiffened just slightly. You said he was a musician, she continued, tapping her fingers lightly against the desk. A pause. He was a pianist, Marcus said finally. Played jazz. Mrs. Brooks' lips curled, not quite a smirk, but close. Interesting. Marcus could tell there was something more behind her words, something calculated. You must have picked up a thing or two, she said. Marcus didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure where this was going, but it didn't feel right. A little, he admitted. That was enough for her. Her smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. Good to know. The bell rang and Marcus turned toward the door, eager to put some space between them. But then, tomorrow, Mrs. Brooks called after him. He turned back, hesitant. What? The piano in the corner, she said, gesturing toward the old upright instrument at the back of the room, forgotten and coated in dust. You'll play something for the class. The room seemed to still. Marcus stared at her. A few remaining students exchanged glances, their curiosity now fully piqued. Why, he asked, his voice even. Mrs. Brooks tilted her head as if the question amused her. Why not? You said your grandfather played. I'm sure you have some of that talent in you. Marcus knew that tone. It wasn't curiosity, it wasn't encouragement, it was a setup. But he wasn't about to back down. All right, he said. The flicker of surprise in her expression was brief, but Marcus caught it before she quickly masked it with her usual smugness. We'll all be watching, she said. Marcus turned away, heading for the door. He could feel the eyes of his classmates on him as he left the room. Marcus barely slept that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the conversation with Mrs. Brooks replaying in his mind like a broken record. She thought this was a way to put him in his place, to remind him that no matter what he knew, no matter how well he did in class, she could still control how he was seen. But she didn't know the full story. He had been playing since he was 5. Long before he even knew how to read sheet music, he had learned the way his grandfather taught, by ear, by feeling. Jazz wasn't just notes on a page. It was expression, confidence, defiance. Mrs. Brooks had set a trap, but she didn't realize he was about to walk right into it and flip it back on her. By the time Marcus walked into Pine Haven Middle School, the whispers had already begun. Word had traveled fast. Some students were talking about it like it was some kind of joke. Others seemed genuinely interested. But no matter their reasons, Everyone knew what was about to happen. As he entered the classroom, the tension was thick. Eric Simmons smirked from across the room. "You gonna play today?" he asked, his tone dripping with amusement. Marcus ignored him and took his seat. "Didn't know you were a piano guy," Henry Crawford murmured beside him. Marcus kept his eyes on his notebook. "There's a lot of things people don't know." Mrs. Brooks entered a few minutes later, setting her books down with an air of satisfaction. She barely acknowledged the students settling in, but her focus drifted toward Marcus. She wasn't just watching, she was waiting. The first half of class dragged, but Marcus barely heard a word. His mind was already at the piano. He could feel it beneath his fingers, the weight of the keys, the way his grandfather's music had once filled their living room on quiet Sunday afternoons. Mrs. Brooks thought she was in control. She thought she was about to humiliate him. She had no idea what was coming. Marcus Reynolds barely heard anything Mrs. Brooks said. The words blurred together, his mind skipping ahead to the moment he knew was coming. The moment she would call on him. And then, she did. "Well," she said, closing her book and glancing at the clock. "We have a little time before the next lesson." "Perfect." The way she said it made Marcus's skin prickle. She turned toward the old, upright piano in the corner, its keys dulled with age. "Marcus, let's see what you can do." The air in the room shifted. Chairs creaked as students adjusted in their seats. Whispers flickered through the room, low and eager. Some faces were amused, others expectant. Marcus didn't move right away. He felt every eye on him. His heartbeat wasn't fast, but it was strong, steady. Then he stood. A few muffled laughs rippled through the classroom as he made his way to the piano. Someone muttered something under their breath. He didn't catch the words, but he didn't need to. He knew the tone. Mrs. Brooks clasped her hands together. "Play whatever you'd like." Marcus studied the piano. The keys were old, slightly yellowed from age. A few were chipped. He ran his fingers over them lightly, feeling the uneven texture. The instrument was out of tune. Not by much, but enough. He inhaled, sat down, rested his hands on the keys. He knew exactly what he was going to play. Then he heard it, someone stifling a laugh behind him. A snicker, low but clear. This wasn't just about proving Mrs. Brooks wrong anymore. This was about proving everyone wrong, and he was going to do it in a way they would never forget. For the first time since Marcus had walked into Pine Haven Middle School, the classroom was completely silent. Even Mrs. Brooks, who always carried herself with smug confidence, had an almost curious look in her eyes. The students leaned forward. Some expected a disaster. Others were just there for the spectacle. Marcus placed his fingers on the keys. They felt familiar beneath his touch, even though this piano was nothing like the one he had at home. His grandfather's piano had been warm, well-loved, with deep, rich tones that filled the room effortlessly. This one? The keys were stiff, the soundboard likely warped from years of neglect. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, a moment of stillness. Then, he played. The first notes drifted through the air, soft and steady, a blues progression, smooth and deliberate. The kind his grandfather had played for hours on humid Arkansas afternoons. Marcus's fingers moved with confidence, rolling through the chords, his left hand keeping time while his right danced over the melody. The classroom shifted. The whispers stopped. Even the kids who had been smirking before sat frozen. Mrs. Brooks crossed her arms, her brows furrowed, ever so slightly. She had expected hesitation, a shaky start. Instead, she was hearing something she hadn't prepared for. But Marcus didn't care. He wasn't playing for them anymore. He was playing for himself, for his grandfather. For every moment he had been overlooked, ignored, underestimated. And he wasn't stopping now. Mrs. Brooks had expected hesitation, maybe a shaky start, maybe a missed note, maybe the kind of timid, uncertain playing that would reinforce whatever low expectations she had already assigned to Marcus Reynolds. Instead, she was hearing something she hadn't prepared for. Marcus didn't stop to check their reactions, because at that moment he wasn't playing for them anymore. He was playing for himself, for his grandfather. He let himself sink into the music, letting each note tell a story only he understood. His fingers glided effortlessly across the keys, finding the perfect balance between precision and raw emotion. This wasn't just skill. This was a conversation between him and the keys. And then he took a risk. His fingers wove into a more complex run, intricate patterns cascading up and down the keyboard. A progression his grandfather had taught him, one that had frustrated him for months before he finally mastered it. A deep, rolling bass line pulsed beneath the soaring melody. Notes collided, tangled, resolved, in perfect harmony. The longer he played, the heavier the silence in the room became. The weight of it settled over everyone, wrapping around them like the very notes filling the air. Nobody laughed now. Henry Crawford, sitting near the front, leaned forward slightly, his eyes wide. Eric Simmons, who had cracked a joke earlier, had his arms crossed, but wasn't smirking anymore. A few other students exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of shock and something else, something close to admiration. Then came the final push. Marcus pressed harder, his fingers striking the chords with confidence, letting the final run carry everything he hadn't said out loud. The music swelled, filling every inch of the room, every quiet space where doubt had once lived. Then, silence. The last note hung in the air for a moment before finally fading. Marcus lifted his hands, resting them on his lap for a second. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then, a single clap. From the back of the room, then another and another. Within seconds, the entire class was applauding. Henry let out a low whistle. "Damn," he muttered under his breath. Eric, still sitting with his arms crossed, gave a small shake of his head. "I didn't know he could do that." Marcus exhaled, his heart pounding, not from nerves, but from the sheer energy of what had just happened. He had done more than play. He had changed something. The applause swelled. Students looked at each other as if they had just witnessed something they weren't supposed to see, something they would never forget. But the loudest silence of all came from Mrs. Brooks. She stood by her desk, arms still crossed, lips pressed tightly together. Her expression was unreadable. And that was enough for Marcus. Because even if she never admitted it, even if she never spoke a word, he had already won. The applause continued, rolling through the room like a slow-building wave. But Mrs. Brooks hadn't moved. She hadn't said a word. Marcus Reynolds sat still, his hands resting on his lap, his breath steady. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't looking for approval. He just let the moment stretch, letting everyone sit with what had just happened. Then finally Mrs. Brooks spoke. "Well," she said, her voice clipped, "that was unexpected." The clapping faltered, the energy in the room shifting again. Students glanced between Marcus and their teacher. A few kids still whispered excitedly, the buzz of something bigger than entertainment lingering in the air. Mrs. Brooks studied him, her expression unreadable. "Where did you learn to play like that?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. Marcus met her gaze without flinching. "My grandfather," he said simply. For the briefest moment, something flickered in her eyes. A thought, an emotion, gone too fast to name. She straightened, brushing invisible dust from her desk. "I see." A pause. The room remained silent. Mrs. Brooks tapped her fingers against the wooden surface, the only sound cutting through the heavy air. Then, as if shaking off whatever had crossed her mind, she turned to the rest of the students. "All right, let's get back to our lesson." But nobody moved. Marcus glanced around. Henry Crawford was still watching him, eyebrows raised like he couldn't believe what he had just seen. Natalie Parker, sitting toward the back, looked almost annoyed, like something had been taken away from her too soon. Eric Simmons scoffed under his breath. "That's it," he muttered. Mrs. Brooks' eyes snapped it to him. "Excuse me?" Eric shrugged, shifting in his chair. "I mean, that's all you're gonna say? He just played." He gestured vaguely, like something you'd hear on TV, "and you're just gonna move on?" A few heads nodded in agreement. Mrs. Brooks' mouth tightened. "This is a classroom, not a talent show," she said sharply. Marcus took a breath, steadying himself. "You didn't think I could play, did you?" Mrs. Brooks' eyes darted back to him, sharp and assessing. Marcus didn't let her look away. "That's why you called me up here," he continued. A few murmurs rippled through the class. Mrs. Brooks let out a slow breath, her posture stiffening. "I simply gave you an opportunity to share your talent with the class," she said, her tone measured. Marcus shook his head. "No, you didn't." His voice was calm, even. "You thought I'd mess up," he said. "That's why you asked." More whispers. Mrs. Brooks' fingers curled slightly against the edge of her desk. That's enough, Marcus. But he wasn't done. You wouldn't have asked Henry, he continued, glancing at his friend, or Natalie, or Eric. But you asked me. The room was holding its breath. Mrs. Brooks's jaw twitched. You're out of line, she said. Marcus's voice didn't waver. I don't think I am. Mrs. Brooks' eyes darkened, her posture stiffening. Sit down. For the first time all year, Marcus Reynolds didn't immediately do as he was told. He looked around the room at the classmates who had ignored him before, the ones who had underestimated him, the ones who had smirked when she called his name. Then, slowly he stood. The silence in the room felt heavier now, charged. And for all of Mrs. Brooks' usual control, she looked just a little bit shaken. But this time, she wasn't the one in charge of the room. Marcus turned, walking back to his seat. He felt the weight of every step, but his heart wasn't pounding anymore. He wasn't nervous. If anything, a strange sense of calm had settled over him. He lowered himself into his chair, still feeling the stares from all around him. Henry Crawford gave him a slow nod, one that didn't need words. Natalie Parker sat with her arms crossed, still watching Mrs. Brooks like she was waiting for something more. But Mrs. Brooks had already turned away. She flipped open her lesson plan, eyes fixed on the page, as if she could pretend nothing had happened. Let's move on, she said. But the room didn't shift back to normal as quickly as she expected. The energy lingered. People still whispered. Because it wasn't just about the music anymore, Eric Simmons leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Kinda weird how you don't want to talk about it, he said. Mrs. Brooks' eyes snapped up. Excuse me? Eric shrugged. You made a big deal out of him playing, he said, but now you're acting like it never happened. A few quiet agreements rippled through the room. Mrs. Brooks's grip on her book tightened. That's enough. But Marcus had already seen it, the hesitation, the discomfort, and so had everyone else. For the rest of the class, Mrs. Brooks's usual authority felt thinner, like a glass window that had just been cracked. She still controlled the lesson. But the students weren't as engaged. The usual rhythm was gone. When the bell finally rang, chairs scraped against the floor as students packed up their things. The murmurs didn't stop as they filed out. Marcus slung his bag over his shoulder, moving toward the door. But just before he stepped out, Marcus, Mrs. Brooks' voice. He turned back. For a second, she looked like she might say something meaningful, something real. Instead, her expression hardened. I hope you understand that this is still my classroom. Marcus studied her. Then, in the same calm, steady voice he had used before, he said, I know. A beat of silence passed between them. Then, he walked out. Henry caught up to him in the hallway. Bro, he said, shaking his head with a grin. What was that? Marcus let out a slow breath. A small smile played at the edge of his lips. That, he said, was just the beginning. Henry Crawford nudged Marcus Reynolds' shoulder, his eyes still wide with disbelief. You just flipped everything upside down, he said, shaking his head. Marcus let out a slow breath, the tension finally loosening from his shoulders. Yeah, he admitted. Henry grinned. So, you gonna play again? Marcus thought about it, about the feeling of the keys beneath his fingers, about the way the music had filled the room, about how, for the first time in a long time, he hadn't been ignored. He had been heard. A slow smile crossed his face. Yeah, he said, I think I will. Marcus walked home that afternoon with a lightness in his step. The sun hung low over Maple Avenue, stretching long golden shadows across the pavement as he weaved through the familiar route. The weight he had been carrying since yesterday, the tension, the doubt, was gone. At the corner store near his neighborhood, Blake's General Store, Marcus stopped to grab a bottle of water. Behind the counter, Samuel Blake, the store's owner, watched him with a knowing look. You look like a kid who just did something important, Mr. Blake said, his voice deep and steady. Marcus hesitated, then smiled. Maybe I did. Mr. Blake chuckled, but didn't press for details. Well, whatever it was, hold on to that feeling. Marcus nodded, tucking the words away in the back of his mind as he stepped outside. By the time he reached home, the smell of Southern-style fried chicken and biscuits filled the air. His mother was at the stove, humming softly as she flipped a piece of chicken in the pan. The golden brown crust sizzled in the oil. She glanced over her shoulder as he dropped his bag by the door. You're home late. Marcus sat at the kitchen table, running a hand through his hair. Had a long day. His mother wiped her hands on a dish towel before sitting across from him. Good or bad? She asked. Marcus thought about it, about the way the classroom had fallen silent, about the look on Mrs. Brooks' face, about how his classmates had really seen him for the first time. A small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. Good, he said finally. Really good. His mother studied him for a moment, then nodded. You want to talk about it? Marcus hesitated, then nodded. And for the next 15 minutes, he told her everything. She didn't interrupt, didn't rush him. She just listened. Her expression shifted between concern, pride, and something else, something softer, something almost sad. When he finished, she exhaled. Sounds like you made her uncomfortable. Marcus thought about it. I think I did. His mother studied him, then asked, and how do you feel about that? He didn't have to think long. Like it was supposed to happen. His mother smiled. The next morning, Pine Haven Middle School felt different. Not in a way that was obvious. Not in a way that anyone could point to. Mrs. Madeline Brooks still taught the class in the same dry, structured manner. She still called on the same students. Still stuck to the same rigid lesson plan. Still acted as if nothing had changed. But something had changed. It was in the way the students looked at her now. It was in the way they looked at Marcus Reynolds. There was something unspoken hanging in the air, something that made the usual rhythm of the classroom feel offbeat. Even those who hadn't paid much attention to Marcus before, the ones who had overlooked him, dismissed him, now saw him differently. Because what happened yesterday couldn't be ignored. And Mrs. Brooks knew it too. At lunch, Marcus sat at his usual table. Only this time he wasn't just sitting with Henry Crawford. A few students, ones who had never spoken to him before, made their way over. Some lingered as if hesitating, unsure if they should say something. Others sat down as if the barrier that had once existed was no longer there. Natalie Parker set her tray across from him, her expression still edged with curiosity. You're crazy when you play the piano, she said. Marcus raised an eyebrow mid-bite. She shook her head. I mean, seriously, how long have you been playing? He took a sip of water, wiped his mouth with a napkin, then said simply, Since I was 5. Henry let out a low whistle, leaning back in his seat. Man, he's been hiding it from us, Henry said, shaking his head. Marcus snickered. Guess so. Across the cafeteria, Mrs. Brooks walked past, her tray in hand. For a brief second, their gazes met, but this time she looked away first. And Marcus? He just kept eating. Because he had already said everything he needed to say. Some lessons aren't taught in books. Some moments shift perspectives, change the way people see the world, whether they like it or not. Mrs. Brooks had spent an entire year looking past Marcus, and in a matter of minutes, he knew she would never do it again. Maybe she would never say it out loud. Maybe she would never admit what she had done. Maybe she would never acknowledge what she assumed, but that didn't matter. Because now Marcus knew something she didn't. When people try to silence you, when they try to underestimate you, the best thing you can do is let your talent speak louder than their doubts. And when you do, they won't have a choice but to listen, even if they don't want to. If Marcus Reynolds' story inspired you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful story. What do you think about Marcus' journey? Have you ever been underestimated or overlooked? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. We love hearing from you. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, share this video with them. Because sometimes all it takes is one moment, one story, and to change the way we see the world. Thank you for watching. Stay strong, stay confident, and let your talent speak louder than their doubts.